The night a poor boy's voice silenced thousands did not begin with applause or bright lights or destiny calling his name. It began with hunger, the kind that gnaws quietly and teaches a child how to disappear. As Eli stood at the edge of a crowded downtown plaza where a charity music night buzzed with casual laughter, glowing phone screens, and people who had come to feel good about giving without ever having known what it meant to need, and Eli, thin as a shadow, wore a jacket someone had tossed aside months ago, sleeves swallowing his hands, shoes long gone to time and dust, his feet hardened by sidewalks that had never once been kind to him. Because life had taught Eli early that being poor wasn't just about not having money, it was about being unseen, unheard, and learning how to fold yourself smaller so the world wouldn't trip over you. He was 14, though hardship had carved years into his eyes, and he carried with him a story written in silence, in nights spent listening to his mother cry quietly after long shifts cleaning offices she would never work in mornings where breakfast was hope and hope was thin, and in one constant companion, a cracked, battered radio salvaged from a trash bin behind a pawn shop, its antenna bent like a broken wing, which still miraculously carried music, and through that radio Eli had discovered a song that felt like a mirror held up to his soul. Hotel California, a haunting melody that spoke of longing, entrapment, and the strange ache of wanting freedom without knowing where it lived, and every time it played, Eli would close his eyes and imagine a world where his voice mattered, where sound could open doors that hunger never could. The plaza that night was hosting an open mic segment, a casual addition to the charity event, and performers came and went, polished voices, rehearsed smiles, safe songs that floated over the crowd without ever landing. But Eli hadn't come to sing, not really. He had come because warm lights meant warmth, because sometimes volunteers handed out food, because it was safer than the streets after dark, and because music made the pain quieter. Yet when the host casually announced that anyone could sign up, something inside Eli stirred, not courage exactly, but exhaustion, the kind that comes when carrying silence becomes heavier than fear, and as he stepped forward, murmurs rippled through the crowd, some curious, others dismissive, a few glances lingering on his bare feet and frayed clothes, because society often decides what a voice is worth before it ever hears it. The guitar handed to him was larger than he was used to, its strings biting into calloused fingers, and the microphone loomed like a challenge, but as the first chord of Hotel California rang out, something shifted, because Eli didn't sing like someone trying to impress. He sang like someone confessing, his voice raw, trembling at first, carrying every night he had slept hungry, every goodbye he never got to say, every dream postponed indefinitely, and the crowd, initially restless, slowly began to still. Conversations fading, phones lowering, because there was a crack in his voice that couldn't be rehearsed, a truth that vibrated through the air and demanded to be felt. When Eli reached the line about mirrors on the ceiling and pink champagne on ice, his voice deepened, aged beyond his years, as if he were singing for everyone who had ever felt trapped by circumstance, and in that moment, thousands of strangers felt something uncomfortable and beautiful at once. The realization that talent doesn't ask permission from poverty, that pain can be a teacher, and that humanity speaks loudest when stripped of polish. Halfway through the song, a man in the front row, a well-dressed executive who had come to donate for appearances' sake, felt tears sting his eyes, memories of a childhood he had buried under success resurfacing, while an elderly woman clasped her chest, reminded of her late husband who once sang that same song on road trips when life was simpler. And a teenage girl struggling with her own invisibility found herself breathing for the first time all evening, because Eli's voice had created a bridge between lives that would never otherwise touch. When the final note lingered, fragile and exposed, the plaza fell into a silence so complete it felt sacred, as if even the city itself had paused to listen, and for several seconds, no one clapped. Not because they were unimpressed, but because they were undone, unsure how to respond to a truth that had slipped past their defenses and settled deep in their chests. And then the applause erupted, not polite, not measured, but thunderous, rising like a wave that crashed into Eli with a force he had never known. People standing instinctively, tears openly falling, strangers hugging strangers, because kindness has a sound when it finally finds its way home. Eli stood frozen, heart pounding, unsure whether to bow or run, because praise was foreign to him. But as the host stepped forward, voice shaking, and asked about his story, Eli hesitated. then spoke softly about his mother, about the radio, about how music helped him survive nights when hope felt like a luxury. And something profound happened. Not just sympathy, but responsibility settled over the crowd, because hearing his story meant they could no longer pretend not to know. A woman removed her coat and draped it around his shoulders, a musician offered him guitar lessons, a teacher promised to help him enroll in school programs, and the executive from the front row quietly made a call that would later fund a scholarship. But the most powerful moment came when Eli's mother, who had been cleaning offices across town and arrived late after hearing whispers of her son singing, pushed through the crowd, eyes wide with disbelief. And when Eli saw her, fear flashed across his face, fear that this dream would vanish. But she simply wrapped him in her arms, whispering, "They heard you," as tears soaked into his borrowed jacket. That night did not magically erase poverty, but it cracked something open, because the next morning, the video of Eli's performance spread across the internet, not as a spectacle, but as a reminder, shared millions of times with captions about hope, about listening, about how sometimes the quietest lives carry the loudest truths. And people donated not just money but time, mentorship, and belief. And Eli, still barefoot but no longer invisible, began to understand that compassion isn't about rescuing someone, it's about standing still long enough to truly hear them. Months later, Eli would sing again, this time on a proper stage, shoes on his feet, his mother in the front row smiling through tears. But even as opportunities opened and life slowly changed, he never forgot that night in the plaza, when a song written decades earlier became a key that unlocked thousands of hearts. Because Hotel California wasn't just a song, it was a mirror, and through the voice of a poor boy who dared to sing despite the odds, the world was reminded that humanity doesn't need perfection to be powerful, only honesty, and that sometimes, all it takes to change a life, or many, is the simple, courageous act of listening, leaving behind an echo that whispered long after the music ended. No one is invisible when we choose to care, and hope, when given a voice, can silence even the loudest doubts.